What's every new heathen's biggest worry? Am I doing it wrong? The short answer is probably. The long answer is there's really no way to do it wrong, except the way that does not jive with you personally. So what does that mean? There's really no wrong way to heathen. There's only your way to heathen. Meaning that this is your path. This is your way. Nobody can tell you how to do it. Nobody can tell you what to do. This is your path. If you're doing something that doesn't work for you, get rid of it. If you want to do something in a certain way, do it that way. That's what personal gnosis is. Now, the thing that keeps us on point, the thing that keeps us on track, the thing that makes it heathenry and not just do whatever the hell you want, we are learning from the past in order to develop a new tradition going forward. We can never recreate the arch-heathen society of the past. We cannot recreate the Vandal Age. We cannot recreate the Viking Age. We cannot recreate the year 880 Sweden, right? That is not going to happen. The world looks different now. Things are different now. Technology, knowledge is different now. The culture is different now. And those things will influence you and your path and how you do things. Our perception of the world is different today than it was for the arch-heathens back in the day. And arch-heathen is really this big blanket term for multiple eras, multiple regions, what we would consider different countries now that looked a lot different back then. And some of y'all out there are trying to look like Viking Amish. If that's your thing, if you want to be an anachronist, a recreationist, whatever, that's fine. There's a lot of great academia in that. And I don't know about you, but I enjoy germ theory and running water. I enjoy being able to see. I enjoy being able to bring my message to hundreds, if not occasionally thousands of people through technology. And that isn't to say that modern times and modern technology don't have problems. Technology is used to track us. Technology is used to influence us in ways that we don't even understand. Technology is used to influence stock markets and do all these terrible things that really only benefit the wealthy. It's all these terrible things, so that doesn't mean that we need to fully embrace the modern world. We are learning from the past and pushing our way into a new tradition going forward. That means taking things from both the past and modern times that are good and keeping those and eliminating the bad things, which really becomes a personal journey of trying to figure out what does work and doesn't work. To break it down, let's go into my process for developing personal heathenry. Firstly, why you're probably doing it wrong is twofold. First, there's always something new to discover. Some new bit of lore, archaeology, and/or interpretation. Discovery and research is integral to keeping us to a certain standard while facilitating growth. And second reason you're probably doing it wrong is you're likely forcing yourself to conform to someone else's ideal of heathenry. People are different. We have different needs, hopes, and purpose. There is no one-size-fits-all heathenry. Consumerism likes to twist religion into something we can sell to the masses. And Christianity, here in the West, is sold as a one-size-will-fix-all path. Polytheism is pluralistic. Many paths, many perceptions, many gods. Bragi would view something different than Thor. Hel would see things different from Freya. None are wrong, just different. You too see things different than another heathen. There is no one-size-fits-all in heathenry, no matter what some online life coach is trying to sell you. Now, how I approach researching new beliefs and praxis. First, look at history. What does the lore say, if anything? What does archaeology hypothesize? And what theories exist in academia? Second, contemporary thoughts and practices. How is it perceived by modern pagans, polytheists, and heathens? Get an understanding of the history of that belief/practice and current opinions on it. This likely leads into further research on occult history and why the spiritualists of the 1800s were wrong, probably, but also gives you a better understanding of how modern pagan ideals evolved. And 3, Building your personal gnosis. Your knowledge, understanding, and interpretation of all that research. How are you going to apply it? Will this be a regular praxis? Something that changes your rituals? Or is it something that grows, develops, and changes your beliefs? Without gnosis, there is no religion. Without shaping your personal path, there is only reenactment of an ancient past. By taking what is useful and discarding what is useless, we become stronger in our path. I call it a path for a reason. You're walking it. Nobody can walk it for you. Accept new knowledge, beliefs, and interpretations that work for you. If it doesn't work, you don't need it. And finally, rinse, lather, repeat. This process is never ending. Have fun with it. Research what you want and follow the rabbit hole to new information. Eventually, you'll get confident enough to smell the bullshit of online gurus and life coach hucksters trying to make money off the desperation of others. The process never stops. We are always learning, always growing. So this is how I do it. I look at the sources. What do the sources say? Sometimes it's not much. Sometimes there's vague little hints of evidence surrounding something, but it isn't confirmable. That's kind of how history works. A lot of it is piecing things together, kind of guessing, figuring stuff out. So I take all that, and then I'm looking at how modern people see it. How does academia see it? How do actual practitioners see it? Because there is a different intention in somebody that is practicing a religion, a spiritual path, esotericism, whatever, and somebody that is looking at it from an academic perspective, going by those guidelines and those parameters and that scientific process, right? There's a lot more scrutiny there, whereas with a religion, there's a lot more personal gnosis and guiding yourself to kind of figure it out. I like to look at what contemporary people are thinking about whatever this thing is I'm looking up, maybe even looking at the fairly recent past, and then of course vetting those authors, vetting those sources, and making sure they're not some kind of crazy supremacist, or they might have links to certain things that are problematic. One really bad source for both of those things is Edward Thorson. Here's somebody whose intention is to be a ceremonial magician, not necessarily somebody that is practicing heathenry. They might call themselves heathen, and that's all well and good, but the intention there is ceremonial magic. Not to mention, Edward does have a lot of links to white supremacy and all that, so not a great source, right? So after you've looked at your sources, and after you've looked at more contemporary ideas, then comes the final gnosis stage, the stage where you actually apply it to your path. How is it going to work for you? Altars are a big example for this. People are always asking, how do I build an altar? Well, we don't really have a whole lot of sources for inside altars. There's a couple of mentions here and there, but there's no prescriptive do X, Y, Z. We do have something else called a horger, which is the outside altar. It's kind of like the Scottish cairn. It's a stack of rocks. And that can be a good outside altar. So that's kind of what the old sources say. So not much for inside altars. We've got a little bit about outside altars, but there's really not much to go on. Contemporary stuff. How do people set up their altars? Well, I noticed that typically they have figures of gods, right? And they have certain things that they're doing, certain symbols that they're working with. Altars are more of a reminder for us rather than something the gods need. And to be fair, that's actually something I took from Buddhism a little bit. I went to Buddhist services when I was in Marine Corps boot camp of all places. And one of the things they mentioned was that these certain things on their altar were not for the Buddha, they were for us. Like the fruit on the altar, for example, was to remind us of life, right? A lot of different things were to remind us of life. And then they had a figure of the Buddha. So that's also something from a different tradition, mind you, but still a contemporary source. Throughout multiple altars, through multiple traditions, you will notice that the figures and such on the altar are things personal to that person. It is a visual focal point for certain things that you are working with, certain things you are venerating, certain beings you are venerating, gods, elements, etc. Whatever is pertinent to you. These are important to you. The things inside are relevant to you. Your patron deity is probably on there. Deities that you closely relate with. Ancestors might be on there. These are personal things to you, right? And that is applicable to your gnosis, because end of the day, it is your practice, nobody else's. Nobody can dictate to you how to heathen. There is no wrong way to heathen, only your way. There's always more to learn, always more to grow, always more to develop, always more to research. One thing I like to do is not just look at Nordic traditions, but also similar things around the world. And if you look at archaeology, this kind of tracks both linguistically as well as symbolically, and then even occasionally migratory. All these traditions probably came from one or several older traditions that may have shared and then eventually evolved and grew with the people as the people migrated to other places and intermingled with other populations. So I can look at other traditions and go, okay, well, we don't know much about hell, for example, but if I look at other underworld gods and specifically the goddesses, I will notice certain similarities that jive with hell, but aren't necessarily in any Nordic sources. And I did that in my hell video, as well as all my other god videos. With that in mind, I do understand that that is different than perennialism. While perennialism kind of believes that, perennialism believes that there is one world religion. I'm going to do a video just on perennialism pretty soon, but it is also important to understand that there are specifics that are personal to those various cultures that make them separate and distinct, and understandings like perennialism tend to erase those things. So while I might look at, let's say, Rome or Greece, they have a moon goddess, right? I might learn a little bit about Mani from there, but their perspective of the moon is more feminine, whereas in the Nordic, it's more masculine. So that's something that's a little bit more specific to Nordic paganism, as opposed to Roman and Greek paganism. And we can also understand that having a more feminine or masculine perception of whatever that is specific to that culture, and there's probably a reason for that, and that goes into diving into the sources and doing your research, right? One explanation is it's hot as fuck in the south and it's cold as hell in the north, so the north sees the sun as more feminine, more caring, and the moon as more masculine. And then the inverse in the hotter places.
The sun is a deadly laser.
And you can see how that is specific to those cultures, specific to those regions, and that there are reasons why. So while I look at the various different ancillary evidence that surrounds, I'm also discerning specifics. And that's part of that development. That's part of developing your path. That's part of developing your heathenry. Your heathenry will be specific to you. Your heathenry will look different than my heathenry. My heathenry will look different than somebody who's doing Baklava or Germanic paganism, or even another Norse pagan. And that's perfectly fine, and we shouldn't be dictating to each other how to believe or what to believe. Now, if somebody mentions something and the sources say something a little different, I will approach with that. Like, some people have been like, well, Odin is a sky god. Odin is not a sky god. Tyr is the sky god. And there's evidence that supports that. But because Odin is the head of the Norse pantheon, which is something that's specific to the Norse, which again gets to those specific differences, right? But simply because he holds that position that a lot of sky gods tend to hold, people will assume that he is a sky god, when in reality he is more of an underworld god. He's more of a death god, a god of battle, wisdom. This is why the Greeks associated him with Hermes and not with Zeus. That which stays stagnant and does not grow always rots. We are always learning, always growing. Always be seeking that next source. Always be looking for better ways to do things, better ways that jive with you. And of course, when it is gnosis, cite that it's gnosis. That's something else that a lot of people will do, especially online gurus that put themselves in positions not unlike myself, where you're a talking head online, because people will find you and see you as a position of authority. Mention that it's gnosis. You have to. It's morally and ethically imperative, because otherwise you may spread misinformation. We see this rampant in Wicca, and a lot of people either coming from Wicca or getting a Wiccan influence, because it's one of the most easily accessible other than Abrahamic religions out there, especially if you're going for something more pagan. But a lot of Wiccans tend to say, oh, do this certain way because you have to. There is no have to. In fact, magic can be simply boiled down to symbolism plus belief equals intent. You don't need all those trappings. I'm going to do a video on that as well, but to make it short, a lot of it is symbolism plus your belief about the symbolism and the intent of what you were trying to do. This goes the same for prayer. This goes the same for building an altar, all of that stuff. Symbolism plus belief equals intent. And that's the difference between prescriptive and descriptive. When we look at sources, when we talk about what the lore says, how I might interpret the lore, these are descriptive things. I am describing, I am describing, I am telling you what the things say, I am not prescribing how you do those things. That's actually something people get wrong with dictionary definitions too. Usually in online debates, you'll see people try to use definitions to be like, well, this is what it means. And they cite Webster. But the thing they don't understand is that dictionary definitions are descriptive, not prescriptive. And that language evolves over time and dictionaries will change over time. I can't remember how often they change it, but it's pretty frequently. Culture, belief, these things, they all change with the people. That's why Viking Age heathenry is going to look different than like the Vandal Age, or why different regions will do things differently, like why Nordic paganism and Germanic paganism have differences. Like Loki is not within the Germanic lore where he is in the Nordic lore. A lot of things in the lore are meant to be figurative, not literal. Ocean Keltoy actually has a really good video, I'll tag it in the link below on the YouTube version of this video, where he goes over a term that he coined, mythic literalism. A lot of people will take a literalist view of the lore, of practices, and think that they need to do it a specific way because that's how we were taught by the traditions that we're familiar with, like Christianity, for example, where these religions will come in and they say, oh, you need to have this certain dogma, oh, you need to do things this certain way, don't do this, don't do that, and the dreaded fear of being lukewarm. Lukewarm Christians. This is something that has become imprinted upon pagans. A lot of new pagans especially don't want to be considered lukewarm pagans. Like, oh, you don't believe hard enough. Oh, you don't believe the correct thing. Oh, you don't interpret this the correct way. When in reality, like, there really is no wrong way. It's an interpretation. Who am I to dictate your path? Who am I to dictate your beliefs? I'm some random beardo on the internet. And the things that I need in my path are going to be different than the stuff that you need. You know, we are different people. We are probably in different stages of life. We have different backgrounds, different needs, different purposes we're fulfilling. Another Nordic concept is Orla. Orla is the concept of fate. It's similar in a lot of ways to the Vedic karma. It's kind of this idea that you are fated to do certain things. My fate is different than your fate. The Norns have something different in store for me than they do for you. So why would we try to follow the same exact prescribed dogma, the same exact prescribed path? Our dogma, quote unquote, is the lack of dogma. It is the antithesis of prescribed belief. It is the antithesis of orthodoxy. So next time somebody says you're doing it wrong and they try to tell you certain things, remember that is probably their path. That is probably how they do it. And if it isn't said in like an advice way of, hey, this is kind of how we do it, and if it isn't said in that descriptive rather than prescriptive way, they're doing it wrong. They are approaching teaching in an incorrect way. There is no wrong way to heathen. There is only your way to heathen. Skull.